Flight 19 disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle on a December day in 1945, vanishing with 14 men and leaving behind a mystery. What started as a training mission turned into a nightmare as they got lost in the infamous sea. Distress signals filled the air when their rescue plane also vanished, adding to the mystery of the triangle. Confusion and fear gripped the crew, led by Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, as they faced an uncertain fate. Join us as we explore the spooky story of Flight 19 and uncover the secrets of the feared Bermuda Triangle. The secrets of the controversial triangle. The Bermuda Triangle is a mysterious area of water that scares some people, but seems normal to others. Some people think of it as just another part of the ocean where ships travel a lot and sometimes sink. However, many believe that more ships and planes disappear here than in other places. This area is also called the Devil's Triangle. It's known not just for missing ships, but also for planes that vanish. In the Bermuda Triangle, it's not only ships that get lost. Planes flying over this area have also disappeared. Some of these planes, during their last message, would suddenly stop talking to people trying to reach them. Then, hours later, they might try to call for help, choosing a direction to fly based on some islands they saw. Despite knowing where the sun was setting and rising, which should have helped them find their way, these planes were never seen again. This makes people wonder if there's something more to the Bermuda Triangle than just being a busy shipping lane. One of the most famous mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle involves Flight 19. This was a group of 5 torpedo bombers from General Motors TBM Avenger. They disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle on December 5, 1945. The flight was a training exercise for the United States Navy, starting from Fort Lauderdale in Florida. Sadly, all 14 men on the planes were lost without a trace. The story gets even stranger from there. A rescue plane, a Martin PBM Mariner flying boat, was sent out from Banana River Naval Air Station to look for Flight 19. This plane also vanished, along with all 13 crew members on board. It's as if they were wiped from existence, leaving no clues behind. Investigators from the Navy tried to figure out what happened to these flights. The events of that day remain a big mystery. The flight leader, Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, was particularly important to the story. As they flew on that day, weird things started happening with their equipment. These strange occurrences would become a crucial part of the Bermuda Triangle's mysterious history. Something went really wrong for a pilot named Taylor and his team. During their flight, Taylor's compasses stopped working right. He couldn't figure out which direction they were flying, where they should go, or how to get back to the land. This mix-up made Taylor mistakenly identify some small islands as being off the coast of Florida. He thought they were somewhere they weren't, which made him lead Flight 19, the group of planes he was with, farther and farther away from where they were supposed to be, over a big open area of the ocean. Now let's talk more about this mysterious story. We're diving into the puzzling events that led to the disappearance of these men, the same mystery that surrounds the many ships that have vanished in the same waters. We're also going to look into the sad story of the men who went out to find them, who never returned home. The journey of Flight 19 started as something that was supposed to be just another day at the office, another training session. They were flying TBM-type planes, and their mission that day was called Navigation Problem Number 1. This task was supposed to combine practice in both flying accurately and dropping bombs, just like the other training sessions planned for that day. The man leading this flight was Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor of the United States Navy. He was a very skilled pilot with about 2,500 hours of flight time, mostly in planes just like the ones they were flying that day. The pilots he was teaching were less experienced. Together, they had about 300 hours of flying time, and each had spent around 60 of those hours in the type of plane they were in now, the Avenger. Taylor wasn't new to challenging flights. He had flown missions in the Pacific Ocean during a war, dropping torpedoes from planes just like these from the aircraft carrier USS Hancock. More recently, he had been teaching new pilots how to fly torpedo bombers at the Naval Air Station in Miami. Let's go even deeper into who Taylor was and what led up to this confusing and tragic flight. How did a day that was supposed to be filled with learning and routine exercises turn into one of the biggest mysteries of the sea? Why did these compass problems happen, and what could have been done differently? The young pilots in the story were from the United States Marines and Navy. They were Captain Edwards Joseph Prowers and George William Stevers from the Marines, Second Lieutenant Forrest James Gerber, also from the Marines, and Ensign Joseph Tipton Bossy from the Navy. Now, I might have said some of these names wrong. If so, I'm sure someone will correct me later. These pilots were set to fly in a group of 5 planes. There were 3 planes called TBM-1Cs, one called TBM-1E, and one TBM-3. These were all types of a bigger plane known as the Grumman TBF Avenger. During World War II, a company called General Motors made these planes under a special agreement. The ones Grumman made were called TBF, and the ones General Motors made were called TBM, following the way the U.S. Navy names its aircraft. Before they took off, each plane was filled up with fuel, getting ready for the flight. But when they checked everything was okay before flying, they found out all the planes were missing their clocks. This might sound strange because you'd think not having clocks would be a big problem. But at that time, they didn't worry too much. They thought it wasn't a big deal because each pilot was supposed to have their own watch. It's little things like this, things that seem small and not important, that might have led to bigger problems later on. Get ready to dive deeper into the story and discover what happened before Flight 19 vanished. The mishaps of it before taking off to the skies. The plan was to start the flight at about 1:45 p.m., the middle of the afternoon. However, Taylor, the pilot, was late, which meant they couldn't leave until 2:10 p.m. The weather at the Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station was pretty good for flying, although the sea was a bit choppy, moving between being somewhat rough and more calm. Taylor was in charge of this flying mission, but he let a new pilot lead the group, which was part of their training. This practice flight was supposed to go through 3 main parts, but they actually did 4 parts. They had just finished the 4th part, which was flying back towards the Fort Lauderdale base after going over the coast of Florida. They flew straight for a while, heading east by following a compass direction of 91 degrees for about 56 miles over the sea. This took them to a place known as Hens and Chicken Shoals, but most people just call it Chicken Rocks. There, they practiced dropping bombs from lowdown. Next, they were meant to keep going in the same direction for another 67 miles. After that, they planned to turn sharply and fly a new path over the big island of Grand Bahama, following a new direction. They had one more turn planned after that, changing to a direction of 241 degrees and flying for 120 miles. This last bit was supposed to finish their practice, and then they were to turn left and head back to the base in Fort Lauderdale. Back at the base and in other nearby planes, people were listening to the pilots talking over the radio. They heard that the pilots were done practicing dropping bombs around 3 p.m. But then around 40 minutes later, a different pilot named Lieutenant Robert F. Cox was getting ready to lead another training flight. He heard a strange message. One of the pilots in the group, Powers, seemed to be lost. He said he didn't know where they were, guessing they got lost after a wrong turn. Lieutenant Cox tried to help. He sent a radio message asking the confused pilot to say who they were so he could help them. After waiting a bit, someone asked for advice on what to do next. Lieutenant Cox tried again, and this time, a pilot, Taylor from plane Fate 28, answered. Cox asked what the problem was. Taylor said both his compasses were broken, and he was trying to find his way back to Fort Lauderdale. He thought he was somewhere over land, probably in the area called the Keys, but he wasn't sure exactly where or how to get back to the base. In this critical moment, the person flying plane Fit 74 took control of the tense situation. He quickly informed the people at the Naval Air Force Station that the group of planes was lost. He then suggested to Taylor, the leader of the lost planes, that he should use the sun as a guide. He should make sure the sun was just to the left side of his plane, that's what port wing means, and then follow the coastline north until he reached Fort Lauderdale. The people at the base wanted to know if Taylor's plane had a special device called a Ouija, which is basically a tool that lets friends recognize each other and helps figure out where the plane is. But Taylor in plane Flight 28 didn't answer this question. Then at 4:45 in the afternoon, Taylor sent out a message. He said they were going to fly at a 30-degree angle for about 45 minutes. After that, they planned to turn north to make sure they weren't accidentally flying over the Gulf of Mexico, which is the big sea area to the west. After this message, everything went quiet. No one could hear from Taylor's group. They didn't know where the planes were, and they weren't sending out any signals that could help locate them. The base tried to solve this, by asking Taylor to use a different radio channel, one that is set to a frequency of 4,805 kilohertz. But Taylor didn't respond to this instruction either. So they asked him to try yet another channel, this time one that's used specifically for searching and rescuing lost pilots, set at 3,000 kilohertz. Taylor did eventually reply, but he had concerns. He said, "I can't change the channel. I need to keep my planes together." He was worried that if he changed the frequency, he might lose contact with the other pilots who were following him, especially since they weren't as experienced. But this raises a question. Why didn't he just tell the other pilots to switch to the search and rescue channel too? As time ticked on to 4:56 p.m., the base tried again. They asked Taylor to turn on his YG transmitter if he had one. This was another attempt to find out exactly where they were. But there was no answer from Taylor to this request. This silence could mean several things. Maybe Taylor and his planes were too far away to hear the message, or perhaps there was something else interfering with the transmission and stopping them from communicating properly. Move closer to the mystery, finding out the choices and strange events that led to Flight 19's disappearance. The final hours before the horrifying moment. Not long after, Taylor told his group to turn and fly straight east. He said to do this for 10 minutes. But then one of the pilots in the group got really upset with this plan. He said loudly, "Oh no, we should go west. That's the way back home." This disagreement made everyone wonder later why the rest of the pilots didn't just decide to go west on their own. The reason they stayed together and followed Taylor, even though he was making questionable decisions, has a lot to do with how the military trains people. They teach soldiers and pilots to follow orders and stick to the plan. Plus, there's something in the way we all think that makes us not want to break away from a group. It's like, if most people are doing something, we tend to stick with them, even if it doesn't seem right. This isn't just in the military. It happens in everyday life too. For example, there was this story about the Colorado cannibal. Even after he got lost and made some really bad choices, people still followed him because they just felt they should, even though it was clear he didn't know what he was doing. It shows that sometimes people just stick with the leader or the group, even when it's not the best idea. As they kept flying, the weather got worse, and it became harder to talk over the radio because of the bad atmosphere. This was worrying because it meant the planes might be really far out, more than 200 miles east over the ocean away from Florida. Taylor then decided they should turn and head west, hoping they'd find land before they ran out of fuel. At 5:24 p.m., Taylor asked about the weather again. He wanted to know what was happening with the storms and the wind. They gathered information from different places, and by about 5:50 p.m., they figured out roughly where the planes were. They thought they were about 100 miles away from a specific spot over the ocean, which was still pretty far from Florida and north of the Bahamas. Things kept going like this until about 6:04 p.m. Taylor told everyone, "Let's keep going west." But then he realized they had made a mistake with how far they had flown east before. He thought it was best to turn around and go back east again. But by now the weather was really bad. It was getting dark and the situation was getting more serious. At about 6:20 p.m., they heard what might have been Taylor's last clear message. But there's some confusion because there's another story that says the last message was actually at 7:04 p.m. In that last message we know about, Taylor sounded very urgent. He told all the planes to stay close together because they might have to land in the water if they didn't find land soon. This was a very scary situation because it was dark, the weather was bad, and they were all running out of fuel over the ocean. As the situation became more and more serious, and it was clear that Flight 19 was lost, everyone involved started to move quickly. Air bases, other planes flying around, and even big ships in the sea were told to look out for the missing planes. They all knew they had to act fast. A special plane called a Consolidated PBY Catalina, which is made for saving people, took off just after 6 p.m. Its job was to find Flight 19 and help them get back safely if possible. As night began to fall, things had to change. 2 Martin PBM Mariner flying boats, which are really big planes that can land on water, were supposed to be doing regular training. But instead, they were sent to look for the missing planes. They flew in big square patterns in the area where they thought Flight 19 might be, around the coordinates 29 degrees north and 79 degrees west. One of these, from the U.S. Navy Squadron Training Number 49, left the Naval Air Force Station at Banana River. which is now called Patrick Space Force Base, at 7:27 p.m. They sent out a normal radio message 3 minutes later at 7:30 p.m. But then something terrible happened. After that last message, no one heard from them again. They just disappeared. A big ship in the area, the USS Gaines Mills, reported seeing something really scary at around 9:15 p.m. They saw a huge fireball in the sky, like a massive explosion, and it was as tall as a 10-story building. They said it lasted for about 10 minutes. They found the spot where this happened, and it was at coordinates 28.59 degrees north and 80.25 degrees west. The captain of the tanker, Shona Stanley, and her crew tried very hard to find anyone who might have survived this explosion. They saw a lot of oil and fuel in the water, which is usually a bad sign after a plane crashes. At the same time, another ship, the USS Solomons, said it lost radar contact with a plane right at that same place and time. This was a big problem because it meant that even more people might be in trouble. Months after all of these sad events, the Navy did a huge investigation. They looked into everything and wrote a report that was 500 pages long. They found out a lot of things. First, they figured out that the leader of Flight 19, Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, got really mixed up. He thought he was flying over a small group of islands called the Florida Keys, and that they were all over the Gulf of Mexico. He thought if they flew northeast, they would get back to Florida. But he was wrong. Actually, they were flying over the Bahamas, which is where they were supposed to be. But then he led them the wrong way, over the Atlantic Ocean, far away from where they should have been. Let's look at the surprising facts and guesses as we try to understand Flight 19's strange trip. The false guide and the forgotten route. The investigation report brought up some interesting points. It seemed like some of the other pilots, not just Taylor, had a rough idea of where they were. They thought if they flew west, they would find their way back to the mainland of the USA. But Taylor didn't want to change the radio to the emergency channel they were supposed to use for help. He was worried about other radio stations from Cuba interfering and messing with their signals. The report said the broken compasses weren't Taylor's fault, so he wasn't to blame for getting lost. But even though some of the younger pilots thought they should go west, Taylor kept wanting to go east. They probably followed him because they were still learning and felt safer sticking with the group instead of going off on their own. The mysterious crash of one of the rescue planes, the PBM-5, added to the confusion. It just exploded in the air for no clear reason, adding another sad part to the whole situation. Over time, the Navy changed its mind about what happened, especially after Taylor's mom said it wasn't fair to blame her son when no one really knew what happened to the planes or the people, since they never found them or the wreckage. If Taylor had been right about where they were, they could have made it back to Florida in 20 minutes if they were flying straight and fast enough. But later, people figured out that he probably saw the Bahamas instead of the Florida Keys like he thought. So they were really not where they thought they were at all. The people who looked into the accident later on said that Taylor was so sure they were going towards Florida, he actually led them farther away into the sea. Also, the people at the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale knew that if a pilot got lost out at sea, the best thing to do was fly west, straight across, because that should get them back to land. There was another piece of advice not everyone might have known. If you get mixed up while flying south, you should turn around until the sun is on your left side and then keep flying north along the coast of Florida. But by the time Taylor and his group decided to go west, they were probably too far from the land to make it back in time. They were almost out of fuel. The bad weather, the planes being designed to land on water but not under these conditions, and the fact that they were almost out of gas made everything worse. It was getting less and less likely that they could be saved, even if they managed to land on the water without crashing. There was also a thought that maybe Taylor got mixed up and passed over Gorda Key without realizing it. He could have ended up flying towards another group of islands, the southern Abaco Islands, by mistake. This all shows just how many things went wrong and how hard it was for them to find their way back. It was a series of misunderstandings, bad luck, and tragic circumstances that led to a really sad ending. After that, Taylor kept going northwest, thinking it was the right way according to the flight plan. He was expecting to see the Grand Bahama Island in front of him and to the right, as per his flight plan. But what he thought was Grand Bahama was actually the top part of Abaco Island. Because his compass wasn't working right, he thought the mistake was because of the compass and decided to change direction, aiming southwest towards Fort Lauderdale. But this new direction took him even more off course, towards the northwest, and out into the wider ocean. Then Taylor saw a bunch of islands ahead that looked a lot like the ones near Key West, but they were actually north of Abaco. The people in the control tower tried to help. They told Taylor and his group to fly west because that should bring them back to mainland Florida. Taylor tried to follow this advice, thinking he was going west, but he was actually going more northwest, which is almost sideways to Florida, not straight towards it. After flying this way for a while and not seeing any land, Taylor started to worry. He thought it didn't make sense that they hadn't hit Florida yet if they were really going west. It's understandable to start worrying in that situation. If you think you're going the right way and you still don't see what you're expecting to see, like land, you might start doubting where you really are. Taylor started to think maybe they were near the Key West Islands by mistake, which led to a lot of talking and trying to figure things out between him, the other pilots, and the control tower. They were all really confused by this point. The broken compass made things worse because they couldn't tell for sure which way they were going. The control tower said it didn't make sense for them to be near Key West because of the way the wind was blowing. Some of the pilots still thought their compasses were working fine, but Taylor wasn't so sure. So Taylor decided to try going northeast according to what the compasses were saying, thinking this would take them back to Florida if they were really near Key West. It was a big mix-up because of the faulty compasses and the confusion about where they actually were. They were trying to solve a puzzle with some of the pieces missing, which made finding the right direction really difficult. Come to the last part as we look at what happened after and keep searching for answers about Flight 19. Out of fuel, out of luck, out at sea things get even more complicated for Taylor and his crew. They tried flying straight west, following what their compasses showed, hoping this would take them to Florida. If Taylor had kept going this way, they might have made it back to land safely before they ran out of fuel. But Taylor started doubting this direction. He thought they had been trying to go west for too long without seeing land. So he changed his mind and started flying northeast again, thinking that they might be near Key West. As they kept flying, they used more and more fuel. Eventually, they had very little left. This meant they were in big trouble because it looked like they might crash into the sea, probably somewhere north of Abaco Island, which is to the east of Florida. Years later in 1986, while looking for parts of the Space Shuttle Challenger in the ocean, someone found a plane under the water near Florida. In 1990, an expert in old plane wrecks, John Meyer, decided to bring up this plane from the bottom of the sea. He thought it might be one of the missing planes from Taylor's flight. Then in 1991, a guy named Graham Hawkes, who looks for underwater treasures, found parts from 5 planes like Taylor's off the coast of Florida. But when they checked the numbers on the tails of these planes, they found out they weren't from Taylor's lost flight. It turns out a lot of these kinds of planes have crashed into the sea near Florida, not just the ones from Flight 19. This area is known for plane crashes because there's a military base nearby where lots of training flights happen. In 2004, a documentary made by the BBC showed Hawks trying again, this time with a newer underwater vehicle to figure out who the found planes belonged to. They managed to read the number on one plane, 23990, and found out it was from a different flight that got lost on October 9, 1943, 2 years before Taylor's flight, and luckily that crew survived. But finding out exactly who the other planes belonged to was still a mystery. The documentary said it seemed like all these different plane crashes ended up in the same area, just 12 miles from their home base. In March 2012, Hawks said he thought the government and he both didn't want to spend more time and resources on this mystery because it was so hard to solve. He even talked to a statistics expert who thought the wrecks might be from Flight 19, but they couldn't be sure. Official records say that between 1942 and 1945, 95 people from the Fort Lauderdale Naval Base died in training accidents. And in 1992, another search found more plane parts at the bottom of the sea, but again, they couldn't figure out exactly which planes they were from. Over the next 10 years, people looking for Flight 19 moved their search area further east into the Atlantic Ocean. They were hoping to find some sign of the missing planes. Despite all their hard work and time spent searching, they still haven't found any clear evidence that they found Flight 19. Then, in 2015, there was a story in the newspaper that said the Navy had found a crashed warplane with 2 people inside back in the mid-1960s near a place called Sebastian in Florida. At first, people thought this might be from Flight 19, but then the Navy said that wasn't true. And even though someone asked the government in 2013 to release more information about this under the Freedom of Information Act, we still don't know who those 2 people were. The Navy said they just didn't have enough details to figure out their identities. There was also another plane found crashed in the Everglades in Broward County, which is actually where I'm from. Well, Broward County, not the Everglades. But this wasn't part of Flight 19 either. It was a different type of plane, a TBN-3E, that crashed on March 16, 1947. Because the pilot, Ralph Wacob, got vertigo, which means he felt like everything was spinning around. I can tell you, vertigo is really disorienting. I totally understand how that could cause a terrible accident like a plane crash. Now, there's also this ongoing mystery about a flight of P-51 Mustang planes that disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle. Like the story of Flight 19, this has puzzled a lot of people and captured their imagination. The Bermuda Triangle is famous for being a place where ships and planes have gone missing under mysterious circumstances. But even with all the stories and theories, there's no solid evidence that explains exactly what happened in these cases. People often like to think there's something supernatural about the Bermuda Triangle because of all the unexplained disappearances. But when we really look into these stories, it's more likely that the reasons behind them are normal things, like problems with the planes or mistakes made by people. In Taylor's case with Flight 19, he kept changing directions, which meant they were basically flying in loops. They were trying to find land, but they weren't making the loops big enough to actually get anywhere new. The story of the missing P-51 Mustangs, like that of Flight 19, reminds us that when we look for answers, we should focus on logical explanations. It's important to remember that understanding the truth about these mysterious events helps us improve how we fly planes and how we handle emergencies. It also helps us appreciate all the different factors, like weather, technical issues, and human decisions that can affect flying. These stories teach us to be curious and to keep looking for answers, but also to stay grounded in facts and real-world explanations. Was Flight 19 merely lost to human error? Or did the Bermuda Triangle claim another set of victims with its mysterious forces? Share your theories below, and don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more.